Hey guys, Martine here. Before we start today's show, I want to tell you about an upcoming event I'll be doing here in DC. It's a live podcast taping at the Apple Carnegie Library, focused on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'll be talking with Ryan Williams from the DC Public Library, both about Dr. King himself, but also about the role of libraries in this moment when what you read can be seen as a political act, and the role of technology in activism and social change. It's going to be a great conversation. This event will be taking place at 2 p.m. on Saturday, January 25th. So if you're in DC and you want to join us, you should sign up in advance. We'll put a link in today's show notes and at postreports.com. All right, here's today's show. So, Dave, how are you doing right now?
You know, I'm doing pretty well. It's been a whirlwind of the last few weeks. I'm Dave Jorgensen, and I am known as the Washington Post tie-dye guy. I'm Dave Jorgensen, and I'm known as the Washington Post tic-tac. I can't say tic-tac. Keep all of this. You have to keep all this.
Why are you so bad at this, considering this is
I'm Dave Jorgensen, and I'm known as the Washington Post TikTok guy, which means I produce a TikTok every day at the Washington Post.
Dave Jorgensen has posted over 3,000 times to the app. Last week, he thought he might be done doing that because the Supreme Court had upheld a law passed by Congress to ban TikTok or to force it to divest from its Chinese parent company, ByteDance. And so Dave, like he always does, made a TikTok about the moment.
I knew I would regret it if I wasn't fully covering this up until the last moment. There was even, it was what we call a group talk, meaning it was multiple members on my team. So myself, Joey, and Carmela. Joey and I were signing each other's yearbooks.
I guess this is it, huh? The ban is happening.
You think we'll ever see each other again?
Carmela came on the intercom to announce what the Supreme Court had said.
Good morning, students. The Supreme Court has issued a ruling on the TikTok ban.
And there was this moment of anticipation that, maybe the Supreme Court is going to strike down the ban, but they didn't.
They've decided to uphold the ban.
No.
And so by Saturday night, TikTok started fading away. Literally, my feed stopped working.
There was a lot of confusion. And then, by Sunday, TikTok started to restore its services. Yesterday, on his first day back in office, President Donald Trump signed an executive order to halt the ban of TikTok for 75 days.
And people, understandably got whiplash. And there's a mixture in our comments of people being grateful that TikTok was back and also confused and even suspicious of Trump's role in this and what it really means for TikTok's future.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Martine Powers. It's Tuesday, January 21st. So we just heard from Dave, one of so many people on TikTok who have been scrambling to figure out how TikTok's future will affect them. But to understand exactly how we got here and what that future might hold, we're turning to tech reporter Drew Harwell. He's been reporting on this app and the government's push to ban it. Drew will unpack why Trump is delaying the ban and what that means for the millions of Americans who use this app. So, Drew, let's dive into some of the chaos of the past few days and this roller coaster around the fate of TikTok. So last week, we saw the Supreme Court ruling to uphold a law that bans TikTok in the U.S. if the app's Chinese parent company doesn't sell it. And this was a unanimous ruling from the Supreme Court. Then we saw the app go offline briefly over the weekend, and then it came back online pretty quickly after that. Take us through what happened.
Yeah, so the timeline was really compressed. Like, the Supreme Court ruled with only a couple days before the ban deadline was to take place. January 19th was the date that TikTok's owner had to sell them by or face a nationwide ban. And as everybody knows, January 20th is Trump's inauguration, and Trump has been saying he wants to save the app. So there's this day period in the middle where, we don't know what's going to happen. So over the weekend, as this was unfolding, TikTok's app goes down for everyone in the country. And if you open the
and
app...
what did it actually look like? If you are a TikTok user and you tried to open up the app on that I guess, Sunday morning, like, what did you see?
Yeah, so if you open the app, instead of a video, you would just get a pop-up that says, hey, we're being taken down by this horrible law. I'm paraphrasing. And we're really hoping that President Trump will save us. But for now, no TikTok for you. And the only button was a close app button.
I'm confused. I'm disappointed. It's a beautiful app. It's brought so many people together. It's changed a lot of people's lives. And for it to just be taken away like that, it feels so not American.
It's been heartbreaking to watch because they didn't ask small businesses what was going to happen to them, and they didn't make a plan.
And so, one, it's a pretty shocking thing to see if you've not been following the story, as a lot of TikTokers have not been. But also, it's kind of a fascinating political moment because it's a great pro-Trump ad. If you're a TikToker and you see that Trump is going to save my favorite app, that works for you. So this was TikTok very openly hoping that, the president would smile at that and kind of save them from this existential threat.
Mm-hmm. So then after people were getting those messages when they opened up the app, TikTok came back online. Explain what happened there and what has transpired in the last 48 hours that has been a lot better for the potential fate of this app.
Yeah, so TikTok came back online after 14 hours.
TikTok is back.
You cannot kill us! Woo! Wait! I can open TikTok, hold on! No, wait, don't play with me. Do not play my emotion TikTok, because why am I on TikTok right now?
Basically, how this law works is it basically threatens punishment against any company that would work with it. And that's like these technical backbone companies like Oracle that host all the data, get it to your phone. And so, TikTok sources tell me that Trump really reassured those companies that, hey, I'm not going to enforce this law. Let's just act like it doesn't exist. You're not going to be fined under it. And those companies played along. I will say also that, the Biden administration on their last day out said this was basically a PR stunt by TikTok. TikTok didn't have to take the app down. And, the law as crafted basically says that you can't download TikTok from the Apple App Store, but you can still use it. I mean, it's going to gradually get worse because you can't get updates and that kind of thing. But it wouldn't just sort of like black out in the blink of an eye. TikTok sort of took the nuclear option and really tried to underline this is the impact of what happens if this app goes away.
Interesting. And in many ways, it seemed like that worked for them, even when looking at what Trump prioritized on his first day as president again. I mean, you had him on Monday night sitting down to sign a bunch of executive orders. And one of these executive orders was about TikTok and about potentially finding a way to protect people's ability to access the app in the future. And that tells you something about, this is like a day one priority for the president of the United States is like TikTok. Can you explain this executive order, what it actually does?
Yeah, so what it says is it's Trump telling his attorney general, the head of the Department of Justice, to, for 75 days, pretend that this law doesn't exist. Act like Biden didn't sign it, that it's not the law of the land, and give the new government 75 days to basically go back to the drawing board, review the evidence of why TikTok is a threat, review the potential solutions, basically give TikTok an out that does not equal a complete and total ban. One thing about executive orders, obviously we saw Trump pump out a bunch of them. I like to call them fancy tweets. These are his decrees on nice stationery. They give a sense of his interests and his policy ideas, but they can't smush out like a big act of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
So
and are very likely to be challenged in court, right?
Totally. Going to be challenged in court. And even, members of Trump's Republican Party are making that argument. Trump may say that the company should be reassured and keep serving TikTok, but shareholders down the road may disagree. State attorneys general may disagree, and they can all kind of, take these companies to task for flouting this law. So if I'm Apple or Google and I'm their top lawyer, I'm having to make the decision, do I go along with the law of the land as I typically always do and not work with TikTok? Or do I go with President Trump, who, is about as inconsistent on this issue as you can imagine, right? And if push comes to shove and this goes into a courtroom, is a judge going to side with us when we say we flouted the law because the president told us to?
Mm-hmm. So this executive order puts all of this on hold for 75 days. But as you said, this was a law that was passed. Not only did President Biden sign it, but it had bipartisan support, pretty overwhelming bipartisan support in Congress. That's not something that a new president can just decide to throw away. So fast forwarding to 75 days from now, what would it take to protect this app in the long term? What would have to change for this law to not be applicable to TikTok anymore?
The big thing would be pass a new law, right? Or repeal the old one. That's how you change laws in this country. Whether Trump can do that is a huge question because this was one of the few bipartisan success stories of last year. Whenever you think about the merit of this law, a bunch of Republicans and Democrats came together and said enough is enough. And then when TikTok challenged it, it went to the Supreme Court and they got no justices on their side, right? And, one thing that is kind of different between the executive order and what Trump was saying in the Oval Office on Monday, on his first day in the presidency, he also, mentioned this idea of TikTok becoming a joint venture with some American company, splitting the app in half and having, American ownership potentially alongside of ByteDance's, China-based ownership.
The U.S. should be entitled to get half of TikTok. And congratulations, TikTok has a good partner. And that would be worth, could be $500 billion or something. It's crazy. The numbers are crazy.
Trump kind of spitballing a 50-50 joint venture. It doesn't really comply with the law either. And so I think you're going to see this tension between the Republicans who want, to go with the law as passed and Trump kind of, Trump is in his mind the master deal maker, right? Art of the deal. And rewind back to 5 years ago, Trump was talking about joint ventures even then. With TikTok, he sees a platform that's extremely popular and, more importantly, where he is extremely popular, right? Where he feels like he's a star. He gets all of these viral hits for his content. He wanted the inauguration to be on TikTok. So, he wants it to keep going, but I think he also senses that there's a capitalism opportunity here to get involved and have the U.S. kind of come out on top.
After the break, how Trump's opinion on TikTok has changed and what the future might look like for TikTok users. We'll be right back.
I'm Jessica Cana, and I'm a reporter at The Washington Post. Every day at The Post, we are trying to make sure that we are holding powerful institutions accountable. For the last 2 years, for me, that has meant looking at child sexual abuse by members of law enforcement all across the country. We identified at least 1,800 police officers who have been arrested for crimes involving child sexual abuse from 2005 through 2022. That number, figuring out that this is happening and figuring out how it's happening, it never would have been possible without the time and resources it takes to do an investigation like this. And when you subscribe to The Washington Post, that's the kind of work that you're supporting. Making sure that powerful institutions are held accountable by the taxpayers who pay for their work. Subscriptions support this work and the people behind it. I'm Jessica Cana, and I'm one of the people behind The Post.
So, Drew, I think it's important for people to understand here that this actually started with President Trump during his first term in office, that he was the one who first proposed a ban of TikTok. He didn't like TikTok. And it's just kind of amazing to think about how much he's done a complete 180 since then and has become a big advocate for this app. Tell me a little bit about what happened there. Why was Trump the original TikTok naysayer?
Yeah, it's a fascinating evolution over 5 years. So late in Trump's first term, actually, in 2020, he put out this executive order, if that sounds familiar, calling for the ban of TikTok or calling for the forced sale of TikTok to a friendly American company, somebody like an Oracle or a Walmart or, that had no social media experience, but that was American.
We're looking at TikTok. We may be banning TikTok. We may be doing some other things. There are a couple of options.
Those executive orders were, again, they were basically rejected. The effort was, turned around in court, and really quickly after Trump was out of office, so he couldn't really push it politically anymore. Those efforts failed. Biden came in, his administration kind of, turned them around. So this was kind of Trump leaning into the China hawk argument that TikTok was this kind of scary international espionage machine. After that, though, I had actually heard from sources in Trump's world that Trump's heart really wasn't in a TikTok ban. This is somebody who's actually pretty savvy about social media and was being told even at the time that Americans didn't want a ban, that a lot of the suburban moms and young voters who he needed to be elected were on TikTok and that they wouldn't have taken very kindly to their favorite app going away. And since that 2020 point, you really didn't hear Trump talking about TikTok all that much. Obviously, he had other things on his mind. But, other people have sort of noted that in the last year or two, one of the big investors in TikTok's China-based parent company, ByteDance, is this guy, Jeff Yass, who's also part of, a really important kind of conservative funding operation called Club for Growth.
And he's American?
And he's American, yes. He runs this investment firm called Susquehanna that is a big investor in ByteDance. So obviously, there's an important Republican figure who would lose a lot of money if TikTok were to go away. And he's also somebody that Trump may want to keep happy. So there are all of these theories going around for why Trump turned around. But I think in the last year, the one that pops up to me and the one that I hear from his people and the one that he is most overt about is that Trump believes he is a star on TikTok, and the data basically backs him up. Trump hashtags get a ton of views. Trump's account on TikTok has more followers than Kamala Harris, than most people, really. And he senses that this is a way that he can reach the youth. He talks about TikTok being his angle into the youth all the time.
And TikTok is largely young people. I guess I have a warm spot for TikTok that I didn't have originally.
I wrote last year about how Trump has a whole TikTok operation. He has a young guy he calls TikTok Jack, who's a Generation Z, early 20s guy.
His nickname, TikTok Jack.
Yeah, TikTok Jack follows him around with his phone held up, edits the videos onto TikTok. So I think a lot of this reversal over the last 5 years is that he senses an opportunity not just to be a deal maker, but to be this celebrity entertainer on a platform where he can reach a really important subset of American voters.
But what's interesting here is that at the same time that Trump has been embracing TikTok, really coming to see it as a very powerful tool politically for his campaign, you have the Biden administration and also other members of the government, particularly members of Congress, who have come to see TikTok as a real threat to America. So how did this law that we've been talking about in this conversation, how did it come into existence?
Yeah, so last year, Congress basically took up the mantle, and with help from the Biden administration, the House and Senate voted and passed the law now we're talking about today. President Biden signed it last spring, and pretty quickly after, TikTok challenged it, said it was unconstitutional, violated users' First Amendment rights, and then that basically carried into this legal battle that ended in the Supreme Court's rejection of that argument. So this was really Trump's fight that he started, and the Biden administration with Congress helped to end it. And now we're kind of seeing the effects.
And what was the Supreme Court's argument there? Why did they say that this ban can stay in place? And I think it's important to note also that it was a unanimous decision, which, is for the state of the Supreme Court, for everyone to agree on this, I think tells you something.
Oh, totally. Yeah, basically their argument was that, there is a First Amendment element to this. It is a speech platform, but national security takes precedent. And they agreed with Congress's viewpoint that data privacy is important and that, not knowing what would happen with Americans' data down the road was concerning enough that they would take this action. And yeah, everybody was in agreement. There were no dissents, and the justices were really skeptical of TikTok's argument and skeptical of the idea that the company could ever promise to not have this happen. So yeah, they saw TikTok's argument as a First Amendment thing, but ultimately decided that national security comes first.
But what about the original argument for banning TikTok and the reason why you had so many members of Congress and President Biden ultimately choosing to pass this law, which was the national security concerns, the idea that either China could be collecting the data of Americans and using them for adverse purposes, or that the Chinese government could find ways to influence the American public through their control of this app? Like, is that a real concern? And is that something that holds water anymore? Or the fact that, like, millions of Americans are in this uproar about not being able to use this app anymore, has that kind of tamped down the urgency of dealing with these national security concerns?
Yeah, so they are real concerns. You hear them in Washington all the time. On the pro side, yeah, as you laid out, there's the data privacy angle, right? Young people are using it. The app knows what people like in terms of their interests. It gets some kind of basic data about where people are logging in from. Important data that, then can go potentially to ByteDance. China obviously is known as one of the world's most notorious online censors, the Great Firewall of China. And, and Chinese hackers have accessed Americans' data. And this came up in the Supreme Court where they were talking about they could be getting personal data on young people who will, in the future become, the workers in the FBI and the CIA. And there's this whole kind of espionage angle. The other part of it is, like you said, TikTok is built on a very popular algorithm, the For You algorithm. When you open the app, there's one feed of videos that you watch. TikTok basically tells you what to watch. So if China were to say, hey, TikTok, show a bunch of pro-communist China content, the idea is that young people would be basically brainwashed by this really popular app. I will note on the other side, these are real points that the FBI and the intelligence community have brought up many times. As for evidence of either of these things actually happening, most of what they talk about is the fear, this kind of speculation that this could happen in the future. If TikTok stays popular and relevant, that these could happen down the road. And what happens if we're in, a wartime scenario and China activates the secret TikTok machine. There's a lot of skepticism about these points, though, to be frank. And, without really the general public being able to see evidence of this happening, we've kind of depended on members of Congress going into these classified briefings with the intelligence agencies. And some have come out and said, yeah, this is a real fear. But others have come out and felt underwhelmed.
But let me ask this. I mean, at this point where you had the threats of TikTok being offline and then actually disappearing for those few hours and then coming back, and now these open questions about what's going to happen in 75 days. Is Trump going to save TikTok permanently? Where does that leave these 170 million TikTok users in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, it's a point really of uncertainty. And, people who don't use TikTok may see this as being kind of silly, right? It's just an app. Who cares? Go into another one. But for a lot of people, these are real communities they've built over many years. People do follow their friends on TikTok. They get news on TikTok. I mean, TikTok is an extremely important news source for a whole generation of people in this country, whether we like it or not. And TikTok is a huge source of revenue for small businesses. There are, entrepreneurs across the country who make stuff, sell stuff, have TikTok accounts, and that has been really pivotal for them. And they've talked about, if TikTok goes away, my life is going to change because I'm going to be making less money. I'm going to be less independent. And so, I think a lot of those users are kind of feeling like, is TikTok just going to disappear and I'm going to lose that out of nowhere? And so you are seeing a lot of TikTokers go to different platforms, right? Like move on to something like a YouTube Shorts or an Instagram Reels. That's kind of the similar, but having to basically start over with different sets of people. And so, and that's a problem, I think, for TikTok, because they talk about, if we go down for so many days, people are just going to move on, right? They're not going to stick it out wondering if, all of this goes away. And also, if we get through this 75 days and TikTok becomes some joint venture with another company that runs it in a completely different way, that will have an impact on how people use the app too, right? We saw how Elon Musk changed Twitter into X, and it's almost unrecognizable from what it was a couple years ago.
Absolutely.
And you even from people who are on TikTok now, they get the sense that the app feels just different than it did even in 2022, right? And so, and I think part of this is TikTok has been very open about courting Trump, not just with these in-app prompts, but, TikTok's CEO went to Mar-a-Lago, was at all of the big inauguration events this weekend. Mm-hmm. And so I think, even the culture of the app is potentially shifting as all of this big Washington drama plays out.
That's so interesting. Drew, thank you so much for sharing all this.
Thank you.
Drew Harwell covers technology for The Post. And that's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. As President Trump's second term ramps up, The Post is covering everything you need to know about his administration. If you want to stay up to date with everything, if you want to show your support for the show, please subscribe to The Washington Post. Not only is it a great way to help us continue to do this work, but you can now get access to Washington Post podcasts ad-free in Apple Podcasts. Subscribe in Apple Podcasts or by following the link in our show notes. Today's show was produced by Rennie Svirnovsky and Bishop Sand. It was mixed by Sam Baer and edited by Lucy Perkins and Monica Campbell. Thanks also to Alexis Fitz. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.